The desert sun hung like a copper coin in the bleached sky, casting wavering heat across the wasteland between Texas and New Mexico. Elias' ghost Thorne rode with his shoulders hunched against the glare, his weathered Stetson pulled low over eyes that had seen too much. Behind him, his pack horse trudged along, and at his side, his blue tick hound Faithful panted in the oppressive heat. Elias hadn't spoken to another human being in 17 days, and that suited him just fine. Words were for people who still believed in things: civilization, justice, mercy. The war had taught him that such concepts were as fleeting as morning dew in this merciless land. He'd spent 3 years as a Union sharpshooter, watching men fall through the narrow circle of his rifle scope, and another 7 years trying to forget the faces that sometimes still visited him in dreams. He was heading north toward the Colorado Territory, nowhere in particular, just away from memories, away from the expectations of a society that wanted him to settle down, marry some proper woman, raise children who would inherit his nightmares. Out here, in the vast emptiness, he could almost breathe. Faithful suddenly stopped, his nose pointing toward the east. The dog whined, a sound Elias had learned to respect. His horse, a paint mare named Jezebel, also turned her head, ears pricked forward. "What is it, boy?" Elias murmured, but he was already reaching for his rifle, his instincts from the war never far from the surface. He followed the dog's gaze and saw it, a dark shape suspended in the air about a quarter-mile away. At first, he thought it was a large bird's nest or perhaps an old wagon wheel someone had hoisted up as a landmark. But as Jezebel picked her way carefully across the rocky ground, the shape resolved into something that made ice form in Elias's gut despite the brutal heat. A cage. An iron cage, the kind traveling shows used to transport bears or lions, hung from a massive dead oak tree by thick chains. And inside the cage was a person. Elias's jaw tightened. He'd seen a lot of cruelty in his 32 years, had participated in some of it, to his eternal shame, but this struck him as particularly barbaric. As he drew closer, he could make out more details. The person was a woman, her body curled into an impossible position within the cramped confines of the cage, which swayed gently in the hot wind. The cage couldn't have been more than 4 feet in any direction, and even from 50 yards away, Elias could see that the woman inside was far too large for such a space. Her limbs were bent at awkward angles, her dress torn and filthy. Dark stains that might have been of blood marked the rusted bars where her skin had pressed against them. He dismounted slowly, rifle in hand, scanning the surrounding area for any sign of who might have done this or whether they were still watching. But there was nothing, just the endless expanse of scrub brush, sun-bleached rock, and that terrible, creaking cage. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, the first words he'd spoken aloud in days. As he approached, the woman's head lifted. Elias had expected to see fear, desperation, perhaps the broken expression of someone begging for mercy or death. Instead, he found himself looking into eyes the color of amber, fierce, burning, with an emotion that wasn't quite rage and wasn't quite pride, but somewhere in between. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with a strong, boned face that would have been beautiful if not for the cracked lips, sunburned skin, and hollow cheeks of dehydration. Her hair, a dark chestnut brown, hung in matted tangles around her shoulders. But it was her size that truly struck him. Even cramped in the cage, he could see she was extraordinarily tall, taller than most men he knew. "If you've come to gawk," her voice was rough as gravel, barely above a whisper, but heavy with contempt, "then look your fill and ride on. If you've come to throw stones like the others, do it quickly. Either way, leave me in peace." Elias stood there for a moment, taking in the full horror of the situation. The cage hung about 8 feet off the ground. The chains were thick, military grade, probably salvaged from some battlefield or fort. Whoever had done this had planned it carefully, had wanted her to suffer, but not to die too quickly. They'd wanted her on display. "The others?" he asked quietly. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "3 riders came through yesterday, stopped their horses, pointed, laughed. One threw a rock, missed. They rode on." She paused, licking her cracked lips. "Before that, a family in a wagon. The children cried. The mother made the father drive faster. No one stopped." Elias felt something dark and familiar stir in his chest. The same cold fury that had carried him through the war, that had kept him alive when better men had died. He looked up at the cage, calculating angles and distances. "How long have you been up there?" 3 days, maybe 4, hard to tell." Her eyes never left his face, challenging him. "Who are you? Another holy man come to tell me I'm cursed? Another righteous citizen come to confirm that justice has been served?" "I'm nobody," Elias said simply, "and I don't give a damn about justice. But I don't like seeing people in cages." He stepped back, raising his rifle. The woman's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her defiant facade, but she didn't speak. Elias sighted carefully along the barrel, aiming for the chain link closest to the tree branch. His finger tightened on the trigger. The shot cracked across the desert like a thunderclap. Sparks flew from the chain as the bullet struck true, severing the weakened link. The cage lurched, dropped about 3 feet, then caught again on a secondary support chain Elias hadn't seen. "Damn it," he muttered, chambering another round. "Wait!" The woman started, but he'd already fired again. This time, the cage fell, plummeting the remaining 5 feet to the hard-packed earth with a crash that sent up a cloud of dust. Elias heard the woman's sharp gasp of pain as the impact jolted through her cramped body. He was moving before the dust settled, pulling a small crowbar from his pack. The cage's lock was old but solid, designed to hold something much stronger than a human. It took him 3 tries, his muscles straining, before the rusted mechanism finally gave way with a screech of protesting metal. The door swung open. The woman didn't move. "Come on," Elias said, reaching in. "You need water." "Don't touch me." Her voice was weak, but still held that edge of defiance. "I can manage." But when she tried to unfold her body from the cage, a cry of pain escaped her lips. Her legs, cramped for so long in the same position, wouldn't support her weight. She collapsed forward, and Elias caught her before she could hit the ground. And suddenly he understood why the cage had been so small. The woman was enormous, not fat, but tall and powerfully built. Even half-starved and dehydrated, she was solid muscle. She had to be at least 6.5 feet tall, her shoulders as broad as his own, her arms thick from hard labor. She outweighed him by a good 30 pounds, and when she fell against him, it was like catching a falling tree. They both went down in a tangle of limbs, Elias's back hitting the ground hard enough to drive the air from his lungs. For a moment they lay there, the woman sprawled across him, both breathing hard. Elias could feel her trembling, whether from exhaustion, pain, or shame. He couldn't tell. "I told you not to touch me," she whispered, and he heard tears in her voice now. "I told you I could manage." "Well, you can't," Elias said, not unkindly. He gently extracted himself from beneath her and grabbed his canteen. "Here, drink slowly or you'll make yourself sick." She took the canteen with shaking hands, and he saw the deep lacerations where the cage bars had bitten into her wrists and forearms. Burns from the sun-heated metal, cuts from the rusted iron, bruises everywhere. Her feet were bare, the soles torn and bloody. As she drank, Elias stood and surveyed the landscape again. Still empty, but that didn't mean it would stay that way. Whoever had put her in that cage might come back to check on their handiwork. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked. "Who did this to you?" The woman lowered the canteen, her eyes distant. "The town, Dust Creek, about 15 miles southeast of here." She gestured vaguely. "They decided I was the reason for the drought, the reason children were getting sick, the reason crops were failing." Her laugh was bitter. "I'm a curse, you see, a monster, an abomination against God's natural order. That's what Reverend Thaddeus Cook told them, and they believed him." "You're tall," Elias said flatly. "That's all. I've known plenty of tall people. None of them caused droughts." "I'm a freak," she corrected, and there was such deep, aching conviction in her voice that it made Elias's chest tighten. "I've always been a freak. When I was a child, people thought it was funny, the giant little girl. My parents loved me, I think, but they were ashamed too. When they died 5 years ago, I thought I could make a life in Dust Creek. I was strong. I could do work other women couldn't. Lift things, build things, haul water, and lumber like a man." She paused, taking another careful sip of water. "But then things started going wrong in the town. Natural things. Drought, disease, bad luck. And people need someone to blame. Reverend Cook gave them someone. He preached about how I was a punishment from God, how my very existence was an affront to the natural order, and they believed him. So they locked you in a cage and hung you from a tree to die," Elias finished. "Creative. They said if I died, the curse would be lifted. If I lived, it would prove I was protected by the devil, and they'd have to take stronger measures." She met his eyes again. "Either way, I'd die. So why did you bother saving me, stranger? Now you're cursed too, according to their logic." "I don't believe in curses," Elias said. He began unpacking his saddlebags, pulling out dried meat, hard biscuits, a spare shirt. "And even if I did, I've done things that already guarantee my soul's damnation. One more curse won't make a difference." He tossed her the shirt. "Put this on. Yours is barely holding together. Then we need to move. If they come back and find you gone, they might come looking." "Where would we go?" she asked, but she was already struggling to pull his shirt over her ruined dress. It was too small for her, barely stretching across her broad shoulders, but it was cleaner and more intact than what she'd been wearing. "I have nothing. No money, no family, nowhere to run." "Neither do I," Elias said. He offered her his hand. "That's why we'll ride north, into New Mexico territory, maybe Colorado. Plenty of places where people mind their own business and ask few questions." She stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment, her amber eyes searching his face for something, mockery, pity, ulterior motives. Whatever she was looking for, she apparently didn't find it, because she finally reached out and took his hand. Her grip was strong, even weakened as she was. Elias pulled her to her feet, steadying her when her legs wobbled. Standing next to her, He had to tilt his head back slightly to meet her eyes. At 5'10", he wasn't a small man, but she towered over him by at least 7 inches, and her frame was built on a larger scale than any woman he'd ever known. "I'm Clara," she said quietly, "Clara Vance, and if you're going to save me, you should at least know my name." "Elias Thorne," he replied, "though most people call me Ghost." "Ghost," she repeated, a ghost of a smile touching her cracked lips. "That suits you. You look like you're haunting something." "I am," Elias said, "but that's a story for another day. Right now, we need to get you on a horse and put some distance between us and Dust Creek." Getting Clara mounted on Jezebel proved to be a challenge. She was weak, her muscles stiff from days in the cage, and every movement brought gasps of pain. But she was also proud, refusing to let Elias do more than steady her, as she pulled herself into the saddle. He ended up walking beside the horse, leading Jezebel by the reins, while his pack horse followed behind, and Faithful ranged ahead, nose to the ground. They traveled in silence for the first hour, Elias watching Clara out of the corner of his eye. She swayed in the saddle, clearly fighting to stay conscious, her jaw set in a stubborn line. Once she started to slip sideways, and he caught her boot, steadying her without a word. "I won't thank you," Clara said suddenly, her voice thick with exhaustion. "Not until I'm sure this isn't just another form of torture. Men don't rescue women like me without wanting something in return." Elias looked up at her, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. "I don't want anything, but if it makes you feel better, don't thank me. Just stay alive long enough to get somewhere safe." "And where is that?" Clara asked, but it was barely a whisper. Her eyes were closing despite her best efforts. "I'll let you know when we find it," Elias replied. A moment later, she slumped forward in the saddle, unconscious. Elias caught her before she could fall, his arms straining under her weight as he eased her down from the horse. There was no helping it now. They'd have to stop and make camp, even though they'd only covered a few miles. He found a small canyon with an overhang that would provide shade and some protection. After laying Clara on his bedroll, he tended to Jezebel and the pack-horse, then set about treating the worst of Clara's wounds. The cuts on her wrists and ankles would need regular cleaning to avoid infection. The burns from the sun-heated metal would take time to heal. As he worked, Elias found himself studying her face. Under the grime and sunburn, she had strong, handsome features, high cheekbones, a straight nose, a firm jaw. Not delicate or dainty by any conventional measure, but there was a raw, powerful beauty to her that reminded him of the mountains themselves, vast, enduring, and utterly indifferent to human opinion. "You're not a monster," he said quietly, though she couldn't hear him. "You're just different, and different scares small-minded people." Faithful came over and lay down beside Clara as if keeping guard. Elias settled himself at the mouth of the small canyon, his rifle across his knees, and watched the sun sink toward the horizon. They had perhaps 3 hours until full dark, and then the real danger would begin. The desert was unforgiving at night, and they were still too close to Dust Creek for comfort. But Clara needed rest more than she needed distance, and he'd learned long ago that sometimes you had to make difficult choices and live with the consequences. He'd saved her. Now he just had to figure out what came next. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of a fire crackling. For a disoriented moment, She thought she was back in her parents' cabin, that the past 5 years had been a nightmare. Then pain lanced through her body, her wrists, her shoulders, her legs, and memory crashed back like a tidal wave. The cage, the heat, the thirst, and then the stranger, the cowboy with the cold eyes and the quiet voice who had shot her down from the tree. She sat up too quickly and immediately regretted it. Her head swam, and she had to close her eyes against a wave of nausea. "Easy," a voice said. "Elias, you've been out for about 5 hours. Your body needs more time to recover." Clara opened her eyes to find him crouched beside her, holding out a tin cup. She took it with trembling hands. Coffee, hot and bitter, and absolutely wonderful. She'd never tasted anything so good in her life. "Thank you," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Elias just nodded and returned to his position by the fire, where he was roasting something that smelled like rabbit. Faithful lay nearby, his tail thumping once when Clara looked at him. "Where are we?" Clara asked, looking around. They were in a small canyon, surrounded by red rock walls that glowed in the light of the setting sun. She could see his horse and another she didn't recognize, both hobbled near a small patch of scrub grass. "About 8 miles north of where I found you," Elias replied. "Not far enough, but you needed to rest. We'll move again at first light." "You keep saying 'we,'" Clara pointed out. "But I'm not your responsibility. You saved me, and I'm grateful, whether I said so or not, but you don't owe me anything more than that. I can find my own way from here." Elias looked at her, his expression still unreadable. "Can you? You're barefoot. You have no supplies, no water, no weapons. You're injured and weak. How far do you think you'd get in this desert alone?" "That's my problem, not yours." "True," Elias agreed, "but it becomes my problem if you die within a day of me saving you. Makes the whole rescue seem pointless." Clara wanted to argue, but she didn't have the strength, and the truth was, he was right. She'd die out here alone, probably within 24 hours. The desert was beautiful, but merciless, and she was in no condition to face it. "Why are you doing this?" she asked instead. "You said you don't believe in curses, but you also said you don't care about justice or helping people. So why save me? Why not just ride on?" Elias was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and distant, as if he were talking more to himself than to her. "During the war, I was a sharpshooter. I was good at it, too good. They'd give me a target, and I'd take it down, sometimes from hundreds of yards away. Clean, efficient, no mess." He paused, his jaw working. "One day, they told me to shoot a Confederate officer who was directing his troops from a hilltop. I found him in my scope. He was young, maybe 19, and he was laughing at something one of his men had said. Just laughing, like they weren't in the middle of a war that was tearing the country apart." Clara listened, not daring to interrupt. "I shot him," Elias continued, "right through the chest, watched him fall, watched his men scramble to help him, and I didn't feel anything, not remorse, not satisfaction, nothing. I'd killed so many by that point that it was just another target." He looked up at Clara, and for the first time she saw real emotion in his eyes, something dark and painful. "After the war ended, I thought I could go back to normal life, get married, have a family, pretend I was still the man I'd been before, but I wasn't. I was hollow, empty. I'd killed so many people that I'd forgotten how to care about people. So why care about me? Clara asked softly. Because you were in a cage, Elias said simply, helpless, abandoned, and I realized that if I could walk away from that, if I could see another human being suffering and do nothing, then I really was as dead inside as I felt. Saving you, it was as much for me as it was for you, maybe more. Clara didn't know what to say to that. She'd expected many things from this stranger, violence, cruelty, indifference, but not this raw, painful honesty. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "For what?" "For what the war did to you, for what those people did to me, for everything." Elias shrugged. "The world's full of sorry things. No point dwelling on them." He pulled a rabbit from the fire and divided it onto 2 tin plates. "Eat. You need to rebuild your strength." They ate in silence, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, Clara felt not safe exactly, but not alone. It was a strange feeling. After dinner, Elias cleaned her wounds again, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone with such hard eyes. Clara tried not to flinch at the sting of the alcohol he used to disinfect the cuts, but she couldn't help a few sharp intakes of breath. "You're tough," Elias observed. "Most people would be screaming." "I learned to be quiet a long time ago," Clara replied. "Screaming just makes people notice you more, and attention is dangerous when you're different." "Different doesn't mean wrong." "Tell that to Dust Creek." Elias finished bandaging her wrists and sat back on his heels. Those people were afraid. Fear makes humans stupid and cruel. They needed someone to blame for their problems, and you were convenient. But their fear doesn't make you a monster. It just makes them cowards. Clara felt something in her chest loosen just slightly. She'd lived with the weight of other people's hatred for so long that hearing someone defend her, someone who had no reason to lie or flatter, was almost overwhelming. "Why do they call you Ghost?" she asked, wanting to change the subject before she started crying. A hint of a smile touched Elias's lips. "After the war, I spent a year tracking down a gang of deserters who'd been robbing and killing civilians. They were smart, careful, always one step ahead of the law, but I could track them. I'd been hunting since I was a boy, and the war had made me patient. I'd follow them for weeks, staying just out of sight, watching their patterns. And then, when they thought they were safe, I'd strike. After the third one died under mysterious circumstances, they started calling me Ghost, because I could find them no matter where they hid, and they never saw me coming." "Did you kill them all?" Clara asked. "Most of them. The rest I brought to trial." He stood and stretched, his back cracking. "Get some rest. We have a long ride ahead of us tomorrow." Clara lay back on the bedroll, staring up at the stars that were beginning to appear in the deepening sky. She could hear Elias moving around the camp, banking the fire, checking on the horses. Faithful came over and curled up beside her, his warmth a comfort in the cooling night. "Elias?" she called softly. "Yeah? Thank you for saving me, and for not treating me like a monster." There was a pause, and then, "You're not a monster, Clara. Don't let their poison live in your head. That's how they win even after you're free." Clara closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she slept without nightmares. They traveled north for 4 days, moving slowly to accommodate Clara's injuries and Elias's caution. He took them on indirect routes, avoiding well-traveled roads and established trails, always watching the horizon for signs of pursuit. Clara grew stronger each day. The food and water, combined with Elias's careful treatment of her wounds, worked wonders. Her cuts began to heal, the swelling in her joints subsided, and color returned to her face. More importantly, she began to walk without limping, to sit on the horse without swaying, to move with the natural strength her body possessed. Elias taught her how to shoot his spare pistol, a Colt revolver that looked almost comically small in her large hands. She was a natural. Her size gave her stability, and her years of hard labor had developed powerful muscles that could absorb the recoil without flinching. "You have good instincts," Elias said after she'd hit 5 out of 6 targets he'd set up. "Most people jerk the trigger or close their eyes. You keep yours open and squeeze smooth." "My father taught me to shoot," Clara explained. "Before he died. He said the world was dangerous, especially for someone like me. I should know how to defend myself." Smart man. They talked more as the days passed, sharing stories of their pasts. Clara told him about her childhood, about how she'd been normal-sized until she turned 12, and then suddenly shot up like a weed. Within 2 years, she'd been taller than her father, broader than her mother, strong enough to help with the farm work usually reserved for men. "The other children were cruel," she said one evening as they made camp. "They called me monster freak, giant girl. The boys were afraid of me because I was bigger than them. The girls hated me because I made them feel small and dainty by comparison. I had no friends, no one who understood." "And your parents?" Elias asked. "They loved me," Clara said, and she managed to smile despite the sadness in her eyes. "They really did. But they were also embarrassed. They'd make excuses for why I couldn't attend church socials or town dances. They'd tell people I was sick or busy or needed at home. They were protecting me, I think. But it also meant I grew up alone." Elias didn't respond immediately. He was sharpening his knife, the rhythmic scrape of steel on whetstone the only sound besides the crackling fire. Finally he said, "My wife couldn't have children. It broke her heart. She'd cry at night, thinking I was asleep, grieving for the babies she'd never have. I'd hold her and tell her it didn't matter, that I loved her regardless. And I did. But she never believed me." Clara looked at him in surprise. "You were married?" "For 3 years. She died of pneumonia the winter after the war ended." His jaw tightened. "I was away trying to find work. When I got back, she'd been in the ground for 2 weeks. The neighbors tried to wait, but—" He shrugged. "After that, I left, sold the farm, packed what I could carry, and rode west." "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. "Me too." Elias looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Point is, everyone's carrying something heavy. Your burden is just more visible than most." On the 5th day, they saw smoke on the horizon behind them, black, oily smoke that could only come from burning buildings. Elias pulled out his small telescope and studied the distant plume. "Dust Creek," he said grimly. "Something's wrong." They should have kept riding. They were almost to the border of New Mexico territory, almost safe. But something in Clara's face, a mixture of horror and guilt, made Elias hesitate. "It's because I escaped," Clara said. "They're destroying the town or destroying themselves because the curse isn't lifted." "That's superstitious nonsense," Elias replied, but even he couldn't quite keep the doubt from his voice. "We have to go back," Clara said suddenly. "I have to face them, tell them I'm alive, prove that their troubles aren't my fault." "That's suicide. They'll just kill you again. probably in an even more creative way. Maybe, but I can't live knowing an entire town might be tearing itself apart because of me, even if it's based on lies and fear. I have to try." Elias stared at her, at the stubborn set of her jaw, the determination in her amber eyes. He recognized that look. He'd seen it in his own mirror enough times. It was the look of someone who decided they'd rather die trying than live with the guilt of not trying. "You're an idiot," he said flatly. "Probably," Clara agreed. "Will you help me anyway?" Elias sighed, a long, weary sound. "I suppose I didn't rescue you just to watch you throw your life away 3 days later." He collapsed the telescope and tucked it away. "But we're going to be smart about this. We scout the situation first, from a distance. If it's too dangerous, we leave. Agreed?" "Agreed," Clara said, though they both knew she was lying. They backtracked, moving more carefully now, using the landscape to conceal their approach. As they got closer to Dust Creek, they began to see other signs of trouble. Abandoned wagons by the roadside, scattered belongings, dead livestock. A mile from town, they found a family camped in a small ravine. The father, a lean man with a weathered face, grabbed his rifle when he saw them approaching, but relaxed slightly when he saw Clara was a woman, despite her unusual size. "You folks better turn around," the man warned. "Dust Creek's gone mad." "What happened?" Elias asked, keeping his hands visible and unthreatening. The man spat into the dust. "After they strung up the Vance woman, the big one they claimed was cursed, things got worse instead of better. Drought continued. Wells started drying up. Then the fever came. Started with the children, spread to the adults. Reverend Cook claimed it was because the curse hadn't been properly lifted, that they needed to burn everything she'd touched to cleanse the town." Clara's face had gone pale. "The children?" "6 dead so far," the man said grimly. "My family got out 3 days ago. Town's tearing itself apart. Some say Cook is a charlatan who caused the problems himself. Others say the curse needs a stronger cleansing. Either way, it's not safe for decent folk." "What happened to Reverend Cook?" Elias asked, though he could guess. "Last I heard, they were holding a trial, if you can call it that. Either they'll hang him, or he'll convince them to start another witch hunt." The man looked at Clara curiously. "You're awful tall for a woman. You related to the Vance girl?" "No," Elias said quickly before Clara could respond. "Just travelers passing through. We'll heed your warning. Thank you." They rode away before the man could ask more questions. When they were out of earshot, Clara turned to Elias, her face stricken. "Children are dead because of me." "Children are dead because of disease and ignorance," Elias corrected sharply. "And because a cowardly preacher used you as a scapegoat for problems he probably caused himself. Don't you dare take responsibility for their stupidity." "But if I hadn't been there—" "If you hadn't been there, they would have found someone else to blame. That's what scared people do. They find a victim and sacrifice them to make themselves feel better." Clara's hands were shaking. "I still need to do something. I can't just—" "Then we'll do something," Elias interrupted. "But not what you're thinking. We're not going to march into town and let them kill you to ease their conscience. We're going to end this the smart way." "Which is?" Elias's expression was cold and calculating, the look of a man who'd spent years figuring out how to survive in a brutal world. "We're going to prove you're not the cause of their problems, and we're going to make sure Reverend Cook answers for what he did to you." They waited until nightfall, then approached Dust Creek from the east, staying in the shadows. The town was in chaos. Fires burned in several buildings, people shouted and ran through the streets, and somewhere a woman was crying hysterically. In the town square, a large crowd had gathered around a hastily erected platform. Elias and Clara crept closer, using the darkness and confusion as cover. From behind a water trough, they could see Reverend Cook on the platform, his hands bound behind his back. He was a thin man with wild eyes and a voice that carried even over the crowd's angry murmur. "You fools!" Cook was shouting. "The curse persists because you didn't follow through. The giantess must be dead. Her body must be burned. Only then will God's mercy return." "Liar!" someone in the crowd shouted back. "You took our money. You said getting rid of her would fix everything." "It would have if you'd done it properly, but someone helped her escape. Someone broke God's judgment." Elias felt Clara tense beside him. He put a hand on her arm, keeping her in place. "Wait," he whispered. They watched as the crowd debated Cook's fate. Some wanted him hanged. Others wanted him exiled. A few still believed his rhetoric and called for another hunt for Clara. The town was fracturing, turning on itself in its desperation and fear. "The water," Elias murmured suddenly. "That's what we need to check." "What?" "The wells. If the water's being poisoned or contaminated, that would explain the sickness and potentially the failing crops if they're being irrigated from the same source." His eyes narrowed. "And I'd bet my rifle that our good Reverend Cook knows something about it." They slipped away from the square and made their way to the main well at the edge of town. Elias lowered his canteen on a rope, pulling up a sample. Even in the darkness, the water looked wrong. Cloudy, with an odd shimmer on the surface. "Mercury," Elias said, sniffing carefully. "Or possibly arsenic. Something metallic. Someone's been poisoning the water supply." "But why?" Clara asked. "What would anyone gain?" "Control," Elias replied. "Fear. If you convince people they're cursed, they'll pay you to lift the curse. They'll give you power, authority, money. Cook's been running a con, using superstition to line his pockets and increase his influence. But the drought is real. Bad luck, weather patterns, who knows? But Cook used it as an opportunity. When you showed up, someone different, someone people were already afraid of, he saw his chance to create a villain. He probably started poisoning the wells right after he convinced everyone you were cursed, knowing it would make the problems worse and cement his narrative." Clara's face hardened. "That bastard. He let children die to maintain his power." "Exactly. And now he's trying to escape justice by blaming you again." Elias straightened. "But we're going to stop him. We need evidence, and we need witnesses." They spent the next 2 hours searching. In Cook's private chambers behind the church, they found bottles of mercury and arsenic, along with ledgers documenting money he'd collected from townspeople for cleansing rituals and curse removal. There were also letters from his previous town, revealing he'd been run out for similar schemes. Elias gathered the evidence while Clara kept watch. They were just finishing when the door burst open and 3 men with guns entered. "Well, well," the lead man said, his gun pointed at Elias. "We were told to check for looters. Didn't expect to find the big cursed woman herself." His eyes widened as he recognized Clara. "Sweet Jesus, you're alive." "And I'm not cursed," Clara said, her voice steady despite the guns. "But Reverend Cook is a liar and a poisoner." "That's a serious accusation," the man said. but his gun had lowered slightly. Elias held up the ledgers. It's also true. Check these records, then check the wells. You'll find mercury and arsenic, poison that Cook's been adding to your water supply. That's what's making your children sick, not some supernatural curse. The men exchanged glances. Even if that's true, one of them said, you broke the town's judgment. You freed her when she was meant to die. She was meant to be murdered, Elias corrected coldly. Based on superstition and lies, I don't recognize that as justice. The standoff might have ended badly, but at that moment a young woman burst into the room. She was pale and trembling, but her voice was strong. "Is it true?" she demanded, looking at Clara. "You're alive?" "Yes," Clara said. The woman started crying. "Thank God, thank God. My mother said you couldn't be evil, that you'd helped her when Father died, that you'd never hurt anyone. She's been sick with guilt, thinking she sent an innocent woman to die." "Who are you?" Clara asked gently. "Martha Hendricks. You helped my mother prepare my father's body for burial 2 years ago. You were kind. You brought food. She turned to the men with guns. "She's not a monster. She never was. And if Reverend Cook's been lying about everything else, why would we believe him about her?" The tide was turning. Elias could see it in the men's faces: doubt, shame, growing anger at being manipulated. "Take us to the town square," Elias said. "Let's end this properly." The crowd in the square had grown larger and more restless. When Clara stepped into the torchlight, walking tall and unafraid beside Elias, a collective gasp rippled through the assembled townspeople. On the platform, Reverend Cook's face went white. "The curse!" he screamed. "She's returned! We must—" "Shut up!" Elias said flatly, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. He held up the ledgers and bottles. "This is your real curse. Your beloved Reverend has been poisoning your wells with mercury and arsenic. He caused the sickness. He created the crisis. And then he used your fear to line his pockets and increase his power." "Lies!" Cook shouted. "He's bewitched. She's—" But Clara had stepped forward, her immense presence commanding attention. When she spoke, her voice carried across the square with calm, devastating authority. "I am Clara Vance. I was born here. I grew up here. I worked alongside many of you. I helped build your barns, haul your water, harvest your crops. I was your neighbor. And when bad things started happening, you let this man convince you I was responsible. You locked me in a cage and left me to die." She paused, her eyes sweeping the crowd. Many people couldn't meet her gaze. "I'm not angry," Clara continued, and it seemed to surprise her as much as the crowd. "I'm sad. Sad that fear could turn neighbors into executioners. Sad that you believed a charlatan over the evidence of your own experiences with me. But I'm also hopeful, because the truth is standing right in front of you. I'm not cursed. I'm not a monster. I'm just a woman who's taller than most. The real monster is the man who used your suffering to enrich himself, who was willing to let children die to maintain his power." The crowd began to murmur, shifting. Someone called out, "Check the wells. See if it's true." Others took up the cry. Within minutes, people were running to test the water, to examine the evidence Elias had gathered. The truth, once revealed, spread like wildfire. Reverend Cook tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Clara's long arm shot out and grabbed him by the collar, lifting him off his feet as easily as if he weighed nothing. He dangled there, sputtering as she held him at arm's length. You took everything from me, Clara said quietly, her voice for his ears alone. My home, my dignity, nearly my life. You made me believe I was worthless, that my existence was a curse. Her grip tightened. But you were wrong. I'm not cursed. I'm strong. Strong enough to survive what you did. Strong enough to expose you. Strong enough to make sure you never hurt anyone else. She set him down, not gently, and 2 of the townsmen immediately took custody of him, binding his hands. The town doctor, an elderly man with kind eyes, approached Clara hesitantly. Miss Vance, I owe you an apology. We all do. I should have questioned the illness more carefully, should have tested the water. I failed in my duty. You were manipulated, Clara said. We all were. The important thing is that the truth is known now. The night passed in a blur of activity. The wells were tested and found to be contaminated, just as Elias had suspected. Cook's hidden cache of money was discovered, thousands of dollars extracted from desperate, frightened people. His letters and documents revealed a pattern of similar schemes in 3 previous towns. As dawn broke over Dust Creek, the townspeople gathered again in the square. This time there was no platform, no prisoner, just people, exhausted and ashamed, trying to make sense of what had happened. Clara stood before them, Elias at her side, and spoke. I could hate you, she said simply. Part of me wants to. But hate is what got us here in the first place. Hate and fear and the willingness to believe the worst about people who are different. So instead, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go north and build a new life somewhere I'm not known, somewhere I can start fresh. And I'm going to hope that you've learned something from this, that the next time someone tells you to fear your neighbor, you'll remember what that fear cost you. Stay, Martha Hendricks called out. Please, this is your home. We'll make it right. But Clara shook her head. Too much has happened. Too much trust has been broken. I appreciate the sentiment, but I think it's best for everyone if I go. She turned to leave, and Elias walked beside her. As they reached the edge of the square, the doctor called out, Where will you go? Clara looked at Elias, who shrugged. North, he said. We'll figure out the rest as we go. We? Clara asked softly, a small smile touching her lips. We? Elias confirmed, unless you'd rather travel alone. No, Clara said. I've been alone long enough. They rode north for 2 weeks, taking their time now that they weren't being pursued. The landscape gradually changed from desert to scrubland to pine forests, the air growing cooler and sweeter. They talked more easily now, the weight of Dust Creek's judgment finally lifting from Clara's shoulders. Elias taught her to track game, to read the signs of weather in the clouds, to navigate by the stars. Clara shared stories from her childhood. The few happy memories she had before her size became a burden. She laughed more easily now, and Elias found himself watching her face when she smiled, amazed at how it transformed her features. One evening, as they made camp beside a clear stream, Clara caught Elias staring. What? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing, he said, but there was something in his expression she hadn't seen before, something softer than the usual wariness. Just thinking you look different when you smile, younger, happy. I haven't had much to smile about in recent years. I know, but maybe that's changing. They were crossing through Colorado territory when they found it, a valley nestled between 2 mountain ranges, green and lush with a stream running through the center. There were no signs of human habitation, no roads or trails, just virgin wilderness. "This is it," Clara said suddenly, pulling her horse to a stop. "This is where we should stay." Elias looked around, his practiced eye assessing the land. "It's good ground, protected from harsh weather by the mountains. Water source is reliable. Plenty of game. We could build something here." "We?" Clara asked again, her heart beating faster. Elias met her eyes. "I told you I was done with people, done with civilization, but I'm not done with you, if you'll have me." "As what? A partner? A friend?" "As whatever you want," Elias said quietly. He dismounted and walked over to her, looking up at where she sat on the horse. "I'm not good with words, Clara, and I'm not good with feelings. The war took a lot from me, and I'm not sure I can ever be the man I was before. But these past weeks with you, I've felt more alive than I have in years. You're strong and brave and stubborn as hell, and you don't take nonsense from anyone. You're also kind and honorable, and you see the best in people even after they've shown you their worst. I admire that. I admire you." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I'm a freak, a giant. I'll always be too big, too different, too—" "You're perfect," Elias interrupted, "and anyone who can't see that is blind. I don't want some dainty, fragile woman who needs me to protect her. I want a partner, someone strong enough to stand beside me, not behind me, someone who can pull their own weight and then some." He held out his hand. "I want you, Clara Vance, if you'll have me." Clara looked down at his outstretched hand, this man who had saved her from death and then saved her again from despair. He wasn't tall or particularly handsome. He was scarred and broken and haunted by ghosts. But he saw her, really saw her, not as a monster or a curiosity, but as a woman, as an equal. She took his hand and let him help her down from the horse. Even standing on the ground, she towered over him, but he didn't seem to care. He just pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist, his face pressed against her chest. "We'll build a life here," he said, his voice muffled against her. "Just the two of us. No towns, no people to judge us, no expectations, just us and the land." "Just us," Clara repeated, and for the first time in her life, that didn't sound lonely at all. They spent the next months building their home, a sturdy cabin made from local timber, with high ceilings to accommodate Clara's height and a large stone fireplace for the harsh winter ahead. Clara's strength proved invaluable, allowing her to lift logs that would have required multiple men. Elias's skill with carpentry and planning ensured everything fit together properly. They worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word. At night, they'd sit by the fire, Clara reading aloud from the few books Elias had carried in his saddlebags while he cleaned his guns or mended their clothes. Sometimes they'd talk deep into the night about their pasts, their fears, their hopes for the future. Other times, they'd sit in comfortable silence, just enjoying each other's presence. Winter came, bringing deep snow that isolated them completely from the outside world. They didn't mind. They had supplies, they had shelter, and they had each other. On the darkest nights, when the wind howled around the cabin, Clara and Elias would lie together in their shared bed, her large body curled around his smaller frame, both finally finding the safety and acceptance they'd been seeking all their lives. In spring, as the snow melted and the valley burst into bloom, Elias rode out to the nearest town, a 3-day journey, and returned with supplies, seeds, and news. He also brought back something else, a small silver ring, simple and unadorned. That evening, as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Elias took Clara's hand. "I know we've never talked about marriage," he said, "and I know the idea might seem strange, given everything you've been through, but I want you to know that I'm yours, Clara, for as long as you'll have me, and I'd be honored if you'd be mine." Clara looked at the ring, then at Elias's face. This man who had shot her down from a cage, who had protected her, who had helped her reclaim her strength and dignity. He wasn't asking her to be small or delicate or anything other than what she was. "Yes," she said simply, "yes, I'll marry you." They married themselves, there in the valley, with no witnesses but the mountains and the sky. Clara wore a simple dress she'd made from cloth Elias had brought back, and Elias wore his cleanest shirt. They spoke their vows to each other, promises to stand together, to weather whatever storms came, to build a life based on respect and partnership rather than convention or expectation. When Elias kissed her, Clara had to bend down to reach him. But it didn't matter. Nothing about their differences mattered anymore.